Good morning everybody, welcome to this episode of Damo's Workshop. This morning I'm going to be giving you a bit of background on me, doing a few Q&As and giving you a bit of an overview of lightning protection and what it is we do. So yeah, let's get straight into it. Okay, so a brief introduction to who I am. I'm Damien Bethell. I am the owner and managing director of Cloud to Ground Lightning Protection. I've been in the lightning protection industry for about 20 years. Absolutely love what I do. I started my working career as a joiner. I decided to retrain early on because as much as I love joinery, it wasn't really my passion and my heart wasn't in it, and I wanted to find something that I truly love doing, and I believe that I found that with lightning protection. I've had the pleasure of working with some of the best people in the industry and learning from some of the best people in the industry, and I believe that sharing the knowledge and helping other people gain awareness is really important. So that's one of the reasons I decided to do this workshop, and that's really me. I've been in the industry a long time and had some really cool stuff to share with you. So yeah, let's get on with it. Okay, our first question comes in from Tracy in Liverpool, and Tracy simply asks, what is a lightning protection system? To give you a very broad and very general overview, a lightning protection system is conductors or series of conductors which is designed to capture and dissipate lightning energy. So it intercepts lightning strikes and takes it safely to the ground and dissipates that energy into the ground. There are many different types of lightning protection system. Most systems are bespoke to the buildings that they are installed on. They use the same components, but they are generally designed to capture and dissipate safely lightning energy. So I hope that answers your question, Tracy, without going into too much of the technical side of it. Okay, our next question comes in from Bradford, from a lady called Sue. She's got a couple of buildings with lightning protection and a couple of buildings without, and she simply asks, how do I know if my buildings need lightning protection? Simple answer to this one, you need to have a risk assessment carried out on that structure. Most buildings that have a requirement for lightning protection will be deemed necessary by a risk assessment, and that will involve you reaching out to your local specialist such as myself. They will send an engineer who will do a survey on the building. They will gather lots and lots of information and ask you lots of different questions about, things like what the building's used for, how many people are in the building at any given time, what are the operating times of the building, do you have fire protection in place, have you got sprinklers, even things like the response time for the emergency services is considered within the risk assessment. And once all that information is gathered, that will go through a risk assessment process, and then the risk assessment will determine if you need lightning protection and what level of protection that particular structure will need. So it's quite a technical, and a lot of information is required to say your building needs lightning protection or it does not need lightning protection. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you. Okay, our next question comes in from David in Manchester, and David asks, how do I know if my lightning protection system complies with the latest standards? Okay, David, this one is a tricky one because in the UK, the current lightning protection standards are BSEN 62305, which comprises of 4 parts. However, this standard came out in 2006 and it ran in unison for a couple of years with the older 6651 standard. Now, the way the lightning protection standard works is when they update the standard or they withdraw a standard and introduce a new one, the new standards are not enforced retrospectively. So your current building or your current lightning protection system could be installed and maintained to an older standard. The only time that you really need to upgrade your system is if you have any modifications done to the building, or you have a new risk assessment for lightning protection done on the building and it suggests that you upgrade to the latest standards. So to give you an example, if your building was the lightning protection system was installed to BS-EN 62305, you would have a logbook on site, because it's a requirement within that standard for you to keep a logbook on site. That logbook will say when the system was installed, the standard it was installed to, the level of protection you have. It should also contain documents from any testing that it's had. It should also contain any documents of evidence of any repairs, any modifications. However, if your building was installed, your system was installed to an older standard, that logbook may not be on site. You may not have that information. So the only real way to know the level of protection you have in place and what standards it complies to is to check any previous documentation you already had. And if you haven't got that previous information, then I would reach out to your local lightning protection provider and ask them to come and do a survey, and they will be able to make an I don't like to use this term very often, but with lightning protection, because the systems are very, very similar, without the documentation, there's no 100% way of knowing what standard it was installed to if that documentation isn't available. So they will carry out a survey, they will carry out a test, and they will make an educated assessment based on their findings, what your system is installed to. But they can also then say to you, the system is in this particular condition at the moment, you are fine to the older standards, or you may need to do X, Y, and Z to bring it up to the current standards. It is a bit of a tricky one, like I said, because the newer standards aren't enforced retrospectively. Therefore, you could have a building that applies to an older standard. So if you're unsure, get a test done, and you should have a bit more information off the back of that test. I hope that answers your question. Thank you. So our next question comes in from Alan on the Wirral, and Alan asks, I have two different systems on two separate buildings. One has been described as an ESE and one has been described as a BS. What is the difference? Okay, so again, another pretty tricky and complicated one. So a BS system would be the British standard system. So that could be any of the previous British standards or the current British standard, which is BS-EN 62305. An ESE actually, it refers to a system called an early streaming emitter, and it's a device that has been designed by engineers and people with an electronic system. And the way an ESE works is it uses electronic, without getting too technical, it uses electronics to generate upward leaders in order to encourage lightning to strike them, whereas a BS system or a BS-EN system uses multiple conductors, and the metallic elements of them conductors are make and generate the upward leaders. There's no electronics in a BS-EN lightning protection system. There are electrical parts to it, but there is no electronics in the external lightning interception and lightning capture side of a system, whereas an ESE device or an early streaming emitter, it uses electrical systems within inside it to generate these upward leaders and therefore encourage lightning to strike the unit itself. Now, it's worth noting at this point, and to most people that are in the industry should already know this, but ESE devices, early streaming emitted devices, do not actually comply to the current British standards, and the standards that they do comply to aren't applicable here in the UK. We don't use those standards here in the UK. Now, having said that, there is no legal reason why you cannot use an ESE device over a British standard system. It's just that you can't certify them to the British standards because they don't comply to the British standards. So if you do have an ESE device on one of your structures, Alan, what I would suggest to you is have a conversation with your insurance company and have a conversation with the building owners and see if they're happy with that type of non-UK system on that structure. If the answer is no, then you need to look at removing that system and putting a BS system on it. If the answer is yes, then it's fine for that to stay there, but I would recommend that you have it tested. I'd also recommend that you look into the documentation that came when that ESE device was installed. Some manufacturers have very, very differing testing regimes for ESE devices. So, for example, some ESE devices the actual device itself has to be tested when the conductors are tested. to make sure that that device and the electronics within it are still working. Some have a 5-year guarantee, and after 5 years it has to be sent back to a laboratory to be retested and recertified. Some have a 10-year sort of guarantee, which is the same, but if the unit fails that test, you have to replace it. This generally isn't common knowledge within the industry, because a lot of people believe that when you put an ESE device up, it's there forever and it'll last forever. Unfortunately, that's not the case. Different manufacturers have different testing regimes and different expiry dates, so it is definitely worth you as a building owner or a person that's responsible for taking care of the lightning protection on that building, that you know what your system is in place and what the testing regime and the potential expiry dates for those types of systems are. So I hope that gives you a very broad and very general overview of the differences between a BSEN and an ESE device. I know I've sort of been heavy on the ESE side of things, but we'll get further as I answer more questions. We'll get further into the BSEN side of things, so listen on, and that should give you a bit more advice, but I hope that's covered it for now. Thanks. Okay, our next question comes from Michelle, and Michelle is in South Mims. Hi Michelle. She asks, how do I know if I already have a lightning protection system? That's a great question, Michelle. To the untrained eye, and without being condescending or anything, to the untrained eye, it can be difficult on some buildings to know if you have a lightning protection system or not. Most architects and construction companies nowadays don't like to see lightning protection, so they actually build it into the fabric of the building. It also can reduce costs on installation, and the standards do actually have a section on this where you can use natural parts of the building, such as the steel frame. If you've got a large steel roof, as long as it meets certain requirements within the standards, you can actually utilize the natural components and the natural construction materials of a building as part of your lightning protection system. So you may not actually see any physical down conductors or any physical components of the lightning protection system, but it will be there. So to answer your question, the only real way of knowing if you believe you have one of these hidden systems is to check your logbooks, check your paperwork, have a chat with your lightning protection provider, whoever they are. If you're still unsure, ask them to come out to site and do a survey for you. They'll be able to identify any lightning protection that you have on site, and they'll be able to tell you if it's up to the latest standards or it complies to the standards that it was installed to. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you. Okay, our final question of the day comes in from Luke, and Luke is a former colleague of mine from Nottingham, and I'm sure he's done this on purpose to throw a spanner in the works, but wait, we'll answer. I'll elaborate a little bit because he's been very brief. His question simply says on Facebook, reference earths. So what I think he's meaning is, do structural lightning protection systems require, under the British standards, reference earths? The simple answer to this is yes. We discussed earlier on in this episode structural earthing and the use of natural components within a lightning protection system. Lightning protection systems utilizing natural components of the building are the lightning protection system is built into the structure. So once that structure is complete, there is no real way of testing the system to make sure it's actually functioning the way it's supposed to if you don't install reference earths. So this is a two-stage problem. So if you are utilizing the natural steel frame of a building and the foundation earth electrodes, you need to be able to measure the resistance between the 2 points and measure the resistance of the earthing. So you need to either install reference earth electrodes with a connection back to the earthing arrangement, and then another connection back to the actual steel frame, which you're utilizing as down conductors, to allow that test to be carried out. But then also you need to have some sort of test reference point at roof level as well, so that you can measure the resistance and the continuity between the air termination system, whatever that is, whether it's a full steel roof or if it's even conductors on a rubber membrane or a CDAM roof or that type of thing, so that you can measure from the air termination to the structure to make sure that you've got a clear path to earth, and then from the structure to the earthing arrangement to make sure that again you've got a clear path to earth and that the resistance levels are within the tolerances set out by the standards. So quite a technical answer to that one, but the simple answer is yes, you need reference earthing or reference test points to comply with BSEN 62305 on a structural arrangement. Hope that answers your question, Luke. Thanks for throwing that one in for me. That's all we've got time for today, ladies and gents. I do appreciate you tuning in and taking the time out of your day to watch through this. I hope you found it informative. I hope it's raised some more questions. If it has, get in touch. Stick a comment on the bottom of the video, send me a private message, fire over an email. Like I say, I'm going to try and do one of these a week. If there's any topics that you think I need to cover or you think I should cover, then please, again, let me know. This is for your benefit as much as it is mine, guys. So thanks again for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next one. Cheers. Bye.